Butterfly Healing Center proudly presents Let's Play Canada, a listening series that aims to give voice to child and play therapists, supervisors, interns, and all lovers of play. May the therapeutic powers of play be elevated here in Canada by highlighting voices and promoting connection across the country. Telling our stories and hearing the stories of others stitches together a collective narrative of the healing landscape across our great country. I am Billie-Jo, registered social worker and Canadian play therapy supervisor, owner and clinical director of the Purple Butterfly Healing Center in Cambridge, Ontario. Our first series, which I am so very pleased to bring to your listening ears, is our Living Legend series, focusing on play therapy experts across Canada. Okay, I am here today. I'm Billie-Jo Bennett, and I'm here today with Dr. Evangeline Munns. She is a certified play therapist, certified play therapy supervisor and trainer, clinical PhD psychologist, and she has extensive work and experience working with families and children. And she is one of my influential supervisors. And so I just am so honored to have you here today, Evangeline, and thank you so much for your time. You have influenced the play therapy community here in Canada greatly, and so we are so honored to be able to hear parts of your story and how you got to be where you are. And so anyways, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
You know, I most know you as somebody who supervised me and trained me in various different things during the CAPT basic sort of training, right? The foundational training in brain models and theraplay, right? Yeah. And so that has been an influence, a significant influence on me. And I also did my my theraplay training with you, both levels of that theraplay training. And so I've been able to experience that with you. But what I'm wondering is if for today, if we could start, I know you've got a lot of experience. I know that you have practiced here in Ontario for, I think, most of your career, but I could be wrong about that. I'm not sure. But I know that you weren't born here in Ontario. I know that you were born, I think, out in Alberta.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And so what I'm wondering is, would you be able to just share with us, the story of you becoming a play therapist, becoming a play therapy supervisor? I know that there's a lot of other things that you are as well, obviously clinical PhD in psychology and, very influential in the theraplay world. But if we could just sort of talk about, how you came to find play therapy, how you came to fall in love with play therapy, I think is really what I'm looking for here.
Fine, sure. Well, it goes way, way back because I grew up in a family of 7 children and I was second eldest. Being second eldest meant that I was always looking after my siblings. So as I was growing up, I was actually taking care of younger ones. Okay, so that was my early conditioning. And I was a Sunday school teacher. And when I was in high school, for 2 summers, I was lucky enough to receive scholarships to attend the recreation leadership course in Red Deer, Alberta. And when I came back, I led classes with preschoolers, latency age children, and adolescents in gymnastics and tumbling, in tap dancing, in folk singing and folk dancing with the adolescents. So I had, besides being second eldest and looking after my siblings, having that experience working with children, I had, when I was in high school, I was teaching children in these various areas and a Sunday school teacher too. So I had a lot of early beginnings working with kids. And when I went to university, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I was so confused and so ashamed because everyone knew what they were going to be, but I wasn't. And I took psychology because I thought, wherever I end up, to understand human beings and the way they think and the way they perceive things would be a good thing. And so I took psychology, and of course, with all that background working with children, I gravitated, well, clinical, because I wanted to work with people, and then focusing on working with children and their families. And also another reason, I had experience, during my summer holidays, I always had a job working with disturbed adults in an institution. And I could see how you could put a lot of effort and hopefully get a little bit of progress. But with children, you could just see the changes in front of your eyes. They were so much more rewarding. And they're spontaneous and fun to be with. So I thought, all right, I'll concentrate working on children. And so that's what happened. When I went to university and took psychology, then I worked, during the summers, again with children. And I worked in a child guidance clinic. That was one of my first jobs. And when I graduated with I graduated with an honors Bachelor of Science in Experimental Psychology. But my first job when I graduated with my first degree was working in a child guidance clinic, working with children and their families. And I loved it.
Where was that, Evangeline? Where was the child guidance clinic?
That was in Edmonton, Alberta.
Okay.
So that's where I worked and loved it. And that's the one thing when you work with children, you see the changes in front of you. But also I learned if you want those changes to persist, you really need to work with the parents.
Yes.
Because working with a child in isolation, you got changes, but you didn't know how long those changes would last if the parents were contributing to the problem of the child. So you had to work with parents as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so then you worked in a child guidance clinic in Alberta, and then somehow you made your way here to Ontario.
Yeah, what happened was I wanted to go on and get my master's and my PhD, and I looked around for good clinical programs, and I felt that I already knew the thinking of the professors in Alberta. I wanted something new, and I was lucky enough to get a scholarship, and so I went to University of Toronto for my master's. Okay. And there I thought, there's such a different emphasis in the psychology department, and I in some cases felt I had more clinical experience than some of my professors. So because I had all that guidance experience. Anyway, so I got my master's at University of Toronto, and then later on my PhD at York University. And the professors at York University, many of them actually had more experience clinically, so that was good. I needed that. Yeah.
What was that like, coming from Red Deer, Alberta to Toronto?
Oh no, I grew up in Elk Point. I grew up in Elk Point, Alberta, a small village of 600.
Oh my goodness!
Northeast of Edmonton. I went to Red Deer just for my recreation leadership courses in the summer. Okay. But coming from Alberta to Toronto, what a difference! Because you see, in Toronto, I felt you could walk the streets in Toronto and no one cared. You could fall down and die and no one cared. They would look at you and go by. I really felt that. I thought, people don't care for each other here. But the longer you stayed, the more you realized that people in Toronto were the same as people in Alberta. A little bit more reserved at the beginning, that's all.
Right. Well, I remember doing some of the foundation training with you in Toronto, actually, and hearing you talk about how you were just going to go out for a walk downtown Toronto. And I just was like, wow, she's so brave to be able to just go downtown. But you had these early experiences of just doing that. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So, if I can interrupt, growing up in a small community, like in a small village in Alberta, you actually had a very open and trusting kind of feeling towards people, because in a small village, if you need help, everyone is there to help you. And if there's a stranger in town, it's exciting because it's someone new and different. So you grow up trusting people, whereas in Toronto, that I had to learn. I was a little naive.
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. Well, you came with the skills and the equipment to build relationships, it sounds like.
Oh yes, I did, and interest and motivation,
Right.
to connect with people. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I know that, like I've heard a little bit about sort of like your journey during your PhD program, but like what was the emphasis there? What were you focused on?
For my PhD program,
Mhm. Yeah.
that was at York University, and it was still in clinical psychology.
Huh?
And I developed a scale um, to detect learning disabilities in children.
Oh.
And actually it was good, and I had real good success with it. And then I should have had it published, and because I had access to that and interest, but what happened? I got married instead. I went on a different path, a family
Right.
path.
Yes. Sometimes that happens.
It
Yeah.
happened. It happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so, you, like, how did you find play therapy specifically? Like, what was happening at that time that, you were brought to it?
Well, I was brought to it when I was still in Alberta because I worked at a child guidance clinic, and
Yeah,
you're working with children. Well, you soon learn that just talking to children, that was not going to work.
right.
And so that's really when I started with play therapy, was when I was still in Alberta. And it was sort of a mixture of directive and also non-directive play therapy. Uh, but later on, when I came to Ontario and got more training as a play therapist, I really started doing non-directed play therapy, which, by the way, was very difficult for me because I'm a fairly controlling person. And it was hard for me to, just sit there and observe and be supportive and not interfere. Um, but it was a good lesson to do that. I needed that. And then, of course, I learned that was non-directed play therapy. That's what I practiced for years. But then I learned about theraplay, which is directive. And
Uh-huh.
of course, that suited me. I love that. But some children really need non-directive play therapy. Clearly, there's a need for both. And I was so glad that I had the training in both,
Mhm.
because I could look at a child and think, okay, what does that child need? And not be just biased to give only one form of treatment. And some children need both. They may need a non-directive approach at first and then more directive later on, or vice versa, directive at first and then non-directive. So I was just glad to have both approaches.
Uh-huh. And so where did you receive your early training in non-directive work?
Well, Edmonton, I was in a guidance clinic,
Yeah.
and there was a psychologist there. And so that's really where it started. And then when I came to Toronto, I took training, I guess, through the Canadian Play Therapy Association.
Okay.
And then I'd go to workshops in the United States as well, the American Play Therapy Association. I was very eager to learn.
Mm.
And, and I was, I had a wide scope as to what might work in play therapy.
Mhm.
And I'm very glad that I've had both approaches,
Mhm.
because some children, need both, not at the same time. But,
Right.
I know I've had working with children, and sometimes they just really need a quiet, non-directive approach at the beginning. And
Mhm.
then, because I am a fairly impatient person, and non-directive, we have to be very patient, as well, And so sometimes I've used theraplay for a while and then gone back to non-directive. I don't try to mix non-directive and therapy in the same session. It's more like a period of this kind of play therapy and maybe a period of that kind of play therapy. But I don't mix them in one session because I think it'd be a little bit too confusing for the child.
Right.
Confusing for the therapist probably too.
Yeah.
Although I know some therapists that do use both methods in the same session. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
I recall in a supervision session with you talking about this exact same thing where developing that patience with a child that was not ready to engage and something about a marble being rolled across the floor. Do you remember
Oh,
that
yeah.
story?
I was working with early in my work. This little girl from Reserve was brought to Edmonton specifically for treatment. And Dr. Schrag, the clinical director of the clinic, gave her to me. And he didn't tell me what to do. He just said, work with her. I had an idea he didn't know myself. He didn't know himself. Anyway, she was diagnosed as catatonic schizophrenic. And she would just sit absolutely still. Not a finger or muscle would move. She would just sit there for half an hour. The only thing that would move were her eyes. And so try to do, well, at that time I was doing non-directed play therapy. And so there we were in the play therapy room. She's sitting and I'm sitting and nothing is happening. And this is going on for, session after session. And I was very conscious, excuse me,
Okay.
what was I going to say? Is she had been flown in from northern Alberta specifically for treatment, and there we were just sitting at each other, just not doing anything. And I prayed that no one would come through. There was a one-way screen that people could watch. I prayed no one was going to be there because there I was sitting, and there she was sitting, nothing. And so I did try being directive with her. And guess what? That didn't work either. And so it was a hot July day, and you've heard the story before.
Part of it, yep.
And I had a boyfriend that I was just madly in love with and not very much sleep. And so there it is, a hot July day, she's just sitting, and I really don't know what to do. So I just sat. And there we are, both just sitting there doing nothing. And this is what I hope no one would watch through the one-way mirror. And finally, I was into daydreaming. There she was into her world. I was into my world and thinking about my boyfriend, to tell the truth. Anyway, and then I heard this marble rolling, and I looked up and she rolled a marble to me. And she had a big smile on her face. So
Wow.
she contacted me. I'll never forget that day. And I rolled the marble back to her, and that's all we did. Rolling that marble back and forth, back and forth. And then eventually I think I added something else. And we went from steps to, more directive play therapy. Right. But sometimes you really have to have patience in non-directive play therapy, especially when you're working with someone like that. Yeah. And you don't meet a catatonic schizophrenic child very often either, do you?
No, yeah. So that's like a lesson in patience. But I mean, when I think about what you were doing there with her, like you were, there was a mirroring process that was happening almost, right?
Yes.
Waiting.
And a big thing, and an acceptance of her.
Right.
I wasn't pushing her. I was just, she's quietly sitting, and so I was quietly sitting, and I was accepting her. That was a big one.
Yeah, that unconditional acceptance.
Yes.
And like not, I mean, I work with some supervisees and consultees that are so concerned about the product of what they're producing in therapy, right? And sometimes lose sight of the need to just be with.
Yes.
And so I often think of that story that you told to kind of alleviate sometimes the pressure that I feel, but also to help others, recognize that that's the most important thing that we're doing with these kids is being with them, right?
Being with them and accepting them, and they can feel that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's an amazing story. Would you be able to kind of share, how did you find Theraplay? Because Theraplay's been such an influential model
Yeah.
I know that you've written about it, and I know that you train about it, and you've trained me and others, lots of others. How did you find it? How did you find uh,
Therapy.
Airplay here in Canada? Like,
Yeah. Well,
that's
yeah, I was very lucky to attend a workshop with Dr. Ann Jernberg and Phyllis Booth, both of them, and they're co-founders of Theraplay. And I just took a workshop. They came to Toronto, and I attended the workshop, and I was so taken by, I was taken by them, and also taken by Theraplay, because I could see that it was beneficial, and that also the realization that you work with a variety of clients. And so some children benefit more from non-directive, but some children really needed the direct approach of Theraplay. And so as a therapist, it just makes you more versatile when you're not just clinging to one method. Because not one method does not fit all kids.
yeah.
So anyway, and Dr. Jernberg encouraged me to get more training in Theraplay. So that was nice.
Yeah.
And so I had her backing to do that. And so I did. And of course, Phyllis Booth too. And Phyllis Booth in the end supervised me.
Okay. So you brought them here for like to train you and others, or
Yes, well, eventually I did that, but the first, I don't know where it was where I heard them and attended a workshop. It was here in Canada, and I've forgotten who sponsored them. But
Okay.
yes, then I brought them into Canada quite a few times.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
great. And
Sometimes that's the way to do it, right? Bring them here.
yes, yes. And then I eventually got trained as a trainer,
Yeah.
and I was able to train, starting across Ontario and then across Canada and then across the world. It was lovely.
Wow, that is amazing.
And I love traveling. So, I always, when I was invited to do a workshop, I would, of course, go for the workshop, but I always added an extra week of just traveling around. So I love traveling.
It's such a smart idea, right? You're already
Yeah,
there, so you might as well enjoy the
yeah.
scenery, everything the place
And
has.
my husband doesn't, I mean, he enjoys some traveling, but not as extensive as I do. So it
Right,
gave me an outlet.
right, right. Yeah. Wow. So where is the most exciting place that you would say you've traveled to do Theraplay training?
To do Theraplay training. Wow. One of the most exciting places I've been is Borneo, but I wasn't there. I wasn't here to do training. Was I? I've been to Borneo more than once.
Mm,
No, no. That was just, I was hitchhiking around the world with my sister and her girlfriend, and one of the places we went to was Borneo because I had a boyfriend there. Anyway, but for training, um, you know, um, I I don't know if it was one of the most exciting, but one of the more memorable ones is just teaching in northern Canada.
ah,
Yeah, because they have so few resources,
uh-huh.
and so that was very satisfying to do that. But I've done workshops in England, in Ireland, in Scotland, in Europe, in Asia. Hong Kong was very interesting. I
Ah,
taught a workshop there. Um, I've been to Australia, but I didn't teach a workshop there. Wow, that's a hard question. I don't know
wow.
what's
So
the most exciting place that I've taught.
sounds like so many exciting places you've been.
Well, I have because as I say, I hitchhiked around the world with my sister and her girlfriend for a year and a half, and
Wow.
and so that was very exciting hitchhiking. This is in the early '60s,
Right?
1960s. You wouldn't do that now because it
No.
would be too unsafe. But then hitchhiking was okay. You could do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I hitchhiked and then stayed in youth hostels. And I remember paying 25 cents a night to stay in a youth hostel.
Wow.
and,
Wow.
and then people that would give us a ride sometimes would invite us into their homes. That
Uh,
happened a lot in Japan. It was lovely. People were so kind and so, opened up their homes to us. We could have traveled there for years, I think. People were so good. But we got good receptions everywhere we went. I think three young girls, we were not a threat to anyone, and
Right.
people, reached out to help us. So it was a good time to do it then. It's too bad we live in the world that we do now, where you just wouldn't do that. You would not hit
Yes.
right now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so thanks so much for sharing all of that. And I'm wondering, um, the climate, the way that things are today, we're still living through a pandemic here. It's not officially over yet. And there's been lockdowns and all kinds of things that have happened over the last several years. Political climate has definitely changed. And um, so, children's mental health is, a topic that is, I often think about the dire need for children's mental health supports and, issues with budgets and funding and all of that kind of stuff. And so, is there anything that you have to say about all of that?
Do you know our world is a tougher place to live in? And that is especially true, I think, for children. Very often, both parents are working. In my day and age, the mothers were usually at home, and if the fathers that worked. But I think children live with a lot more stresses in this day and age, and so they need support like play therapy. And yet, that's not free usually. Usually, parents have to pay for that. Uh, so I don't know, are we going to wake up a society and realize that um, as there are more stresses in our lives, that we need more mental health support, and that people shouldn't have to pay for play therapy if they have a child that needs it, that it should be all government supported. Um, there is certainly clearly some financial support from the government for mental health kind of treatment, but there can be long waiting lists for that as well. And so I think there needs to be more focus on in the mental health field,
Mhm,
on help, especially helping children.
mhm,
Because if you help children, you can really put them on the right path. And
mhm.
if you don't, the problems can get worse and more embedded and much more difficult to treat.
Mhm.
You know that.
Yeah, yeah, and they really, they're the future, right? Like we should be investing
Yes,
in children.
yes,
I often find that, or sort of, think about, they're often the last, population that we think about as a society. They're not always respected the way that they need to be respected. And so yeah, I'm right there with you. Wouldn't that be a dream if, politicians and the government would, recognize the importance of play and play therapy for children, bring it
yes,
to every child. Wouldn't that
yes,
be
yes.
remarkable?
Yeah, wouldn't that be something? Yeah.
Really change
Well,
the world.
well, Ford has said, Premier Ford in Ontario has said that there's he recognizes the need for mental health kind of support, but not necessarily towards children.
Mhm.
He just said mental health. Well, at least that's nice that he recognized that there needs to be more support for mental health. Um, I know. I think the world's a tougher place to live in. The parents are more stressed. Very often, both parents are working now, whereas when I was growing up, the father worked, but the mother stayed at home. And with parents being more stressed out, they're going to be a little harder on their children, aren't they? They haven't got time just to enjoy their children and play with them and all that. Uh,
Mhm.
so I think it's a tougher world for the children, more stress for them, more stress for the parents, and more stress for the children. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah. And taking that to like the next level of like clinicians seeing these children that are so stressed and the pressure
yes,
that clinicians feel as parents are bringing their kids in, to get an end result in terms of the therapy. And um I often think about, the need to really be the advocate and the voice for the child, right?
yes,
and that, that unconditional acceptance and the being with that we talked about earlier, and how, we exude that as a clinician, just right there with the child in the moment, um,
Yeah.
how very important that is. Um, so, uh, yeah, I wonder if would you be able to speak to the statement, "Play is the voice of the child"?
I think play is the voice of the child because the child often doesn't have the verbal kind of means to express really how they feel, but they can do it through play.
Mhm.
And the lovely thing is that they can do it through play in a free manner. They're not censoring what they're doing, which they might censor when they talk, but not when they play. They just lose themselves into it. And so the subconscious comes out as well as the conscious feelings. And all children need it. Adults need it too.
Mm. Mhm.
It's just that we are kind of above it all, aren't we? But
Yeah.
adults need it too.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what it reminds me of? One of the things that I was so glad I experienced were mother-child groups
Mm.
where it was wonderful because not only did the children benefit so much in increasing their playful interactions with the mothers, but the mothers benefited from each other.
Mhm.
Uh, it was so therapeutic for the mothers as well as the children. And one of the more outstanding results were actually with fathers and their sons,
Mhm.
because we often focus on maybe mother-child relationships rather than father-son or father-child relationships. And I remember leading a number of father-son groups and just being amazed at how wonderful the results were, where the fathers felt so much closer to their sons. And I thought we need to do more work with fathers and sons.
Uh,
Um, I
Yeah.
kind of I kind of strayed in the topic there. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. You know what? I enjoy hearing the stories, and you know what? I agree. Like, I think that when we're doing these types of interventions or these groups with families, being able to step back and just notice, right, the impact that we're having. Like that's, increasing playfulness between parents and children is such an important thing that we do as clinicians,
Yeah,
engage the play system, right?
yeah, yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And that they enjoy each other. Like, how often do parents actually just play with their kids? You
Right.
know, probably not that often. And yeah, in the parent-child groups, it was so good to see them just enjoying their children.
Yeah.
Uh, and the parents supporting each other too. That was lovely to
Right.
see. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
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 His parents often work in isolation, and it was so good to see them supporting each other. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Together. Yeah.
Mhm.
Is there any advice that you have for people that are interested in getting trained in play therapy, or new clinicians that have been trained in play therapy? Is there any piece of advice that you would give as they're just starting out with all your experience?
Do you know what? One of the things I can think of is get training and experience in more than one kind of model of play therapy.
Mhm.
Get training certainly in non-directed play therapy and learn how to practice it in a truly traditional way.
Mhm.
Then learn other kind of play therapy methods that are maybe more directive, but have more than one method, because you'll get a variety of children coming to your clinic. And even with the one child may need one type of therapy at one stage and a different therapy at another stage. So that's one piece of advice I would get is don't just stick to one method, learn, more than one method.
Yeah, that is wise advice.
Yeah, and be properly trained, not just reading from books. Try to get training from certified trainers if you can, even if it means traveling a little bit and it's a little bit expensive. In the end, it's worth it.
Yeah.
Um, um, don't forget to learn to play for yourself too. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
have
Right.
periods where you're just playing as well, where you're just having a good time and letting go.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there ways that you do that these days?
Well, you know what? Well, I'm 88 years old, so of course that slows you down, right? But for me, um, my play times, I guess, well, I think immediately of skiing
Yeah.
because I skied for years and taught skiing, but just the skiing was just letting go. Um, I think it's really important for everyone to have a creative outlet. And
Yeah.
for me, it's painting.
Huh.
And, you know, I'm pretty serious into it. I'm into galleries, etc. I mean, if you really love something and you apply yourself to it, you're probably going to get pretty good at it, right?
Uh-huh.
So even though the main thing for painting for me is the creative act. And I think everybody should have a way of creating. I don't care, even if it's cooking, but so whatever, but there's some creative outlet for you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and get a variety of techniques, not just one. I've said that already. Get non-directive, get training in that, and get training in directive techniques too. And you know what's really healthy is not just think, oh well, I'm trained now, that's it. Like I continue to take workshops throughout my career,
Mm,
even though I was teaching workshops, but also taking workshops because you
mhm.
can always learn, can't you? Uh,
Yes, always.
so yeah, and I would even travel like sometimes to the States if I wanted to, if there was someone giving a workshop like Ileana Gill, who
Yeah.
I admire, uh, well, and Phyllis Booth and Ann Jernberg and all those people. Um, so yeah, be open to learning something new.
Yeah.
Um, Save time for yourself because you know play therapists are in demand, and working with kids, you because they're needy, and it's so easy to respond. Like I used to work long hours. I'd come home, start early in the morning, come home at 8 o'clock,
Mhm.
and my husband and my daughter would say, "Hey, mom, what's for supper?" And I would have to cook supper then. But I was working way too long hours. It's not good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's easy to do in the mental health field when you've got people that really are needy,
Mm,
and you don't have, you know, usually in the mental health field, we don't have a lot of resources, like we don't have a lot of money. So the therapists that are working in the mental health field, they can have long hours and long waiting lists of people that, you know, are waiting to see you, and it's easy to respond to that and forget about yourself. And you just don't forget about yourself, and for God's sake, don't forget about your family.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, Evangeline, thank you so much for your time here today. I so appreciate listening to your stories and hearing your voice and elevating, through your voice, the voices of others. I think that is really my intention with this podcast, is to connect, people across the country, play therapists, people in Canada who are practicing play therapy, and just people that love to play. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. I so much appreciate it. And yeah, happy playing.
And listen, you know, Billie-Jo, thank you for doing this. I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing. So thank you for doing it.
Okay, I'll send you the link when it's up.
All right, that's good.
Okay.
Take care. Bye
Take
bye.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. This podcast was proudly brought to you by the Purple Butterfly Healing Center in Cambridge, Ontario, Canada. For more information about the Purple Butterfly Healing Center and child and play therapy, please visit our website at www.purplebutterfly.ca.